In January 2026, 9 nations representing 46% of Earth's population didn't just launch a new currency. They activated a playbook, a specific, proven, four-stage strategic sequence designed to dismantle a global reserve currency and replace it with their own. This playbook has been run successfully twice in modern history. Once in 1944, when the United States used it to strip Britain of the pound's global dominance in less than 2 years. And again in 1971, when Nixon weaponized it to force the entire world onto a pure dollar system. Now, in 2026, the BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, and Iran, just executed stage 3 of this exact playbook. They call their currency the unit. And as of right now, it's not a concept. It's not a proposal. It's live. It's operational. And it's settling real cross-border trade between some of the largest economies on the planet without touching a single US dollar. Here's the playbook they're running. Here's what stage we're at. And here's the timeline for what happens next. The currency replacement playbook. This is what I call the currency replacement playbook. It's a four-stage strategic framework used by rising powers to overthrow an existing reserve currency without firing a shot. And it works because it doesn't attack the old system directly. It builds a parallel system that becomes too big to ignore. Let me show you how it works and how we've seen it work before. Stage 1. Build the parallel infrastructure. You don't replace a global currency by declaring war on it. You replace it by quietly building an alternative financial architecture that solves real problems the old system can't or won't fix. Historical example, 1944. While Britain was bleeding resources fighting World War II, the United States was building the infrastructure for dollar dominance. They created the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Marshall Plan lending structure, an entire global financial ecosystem designed around the dollar, not the pound. Britain didn't even notice until it was too late. By the time the war ended, the architecture for dollar supremacy was already built and operational. Modern parallel, 2015 to 2023. While the West was focused on the war on terror, financial crises, and COVID, the BRICS alliance wasn't idle. They built the New Development Bank in 2015, headquartered in Shanghai. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, backed by 100+ nations. BRICS Pay, a cross-border payment system. Bilateral currency swap agreements between member nations. Independent commodities exchanges trading oil and gold outside Western control. Stage 1 is already complete. The infrastructure exists. Stage 2. Create urgency through crisis. You can build a parallel system, but getting people to actually use it requires urgency. Countries need a reason to risk abandoning the familiar for the unknown. So you create, or exploit, a crisis that makes the old system look unreliable or weaponized. Historical example, 1945 to 1947. Britain needed massive loans to rebuild after World War II. Their economy was devastated. The United States offered help, but with strings attached. American loans required Britain to make the pound convertible and to accept dollar-based terms. Britain was forced to choose, accept dollar dominance or collapse economically. The crisis made the choice for them. Modern parallel, February 2022. After Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States and European Union did something unprecedented. They froze over $300 billion of Russia's foreign currency reserves. Money Russia had accumulated over decades, stored in Western banks, made inaccessible overnight. This wasn't just a sanction. It was a demonstration. Every country watching, China, India, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Indonesia, learned the same terrifying lesson. If you store your wealth in the Western financial system, you don't control it. They do. That single action created the urgency. Nations that had been comfortable with dollar dominance suddenly had an existential reason to find alternatives. Fast. Stage 2 created the motivation. Stage 3 launched the alternative. Once the infrastructure is built and the urgency exists, Stage 3 is the public launch. You don't just announce the new system. You demonstrate that it works, at scale, with real transactions solving real problems. Historical example, July 1944, Bretton Woods Agreement. The United States didn't just propose dollar dominance. They convened 44 nations at Bretton Woods and presented a fully operational system. The dollar backed by gold, the IMF to manage it, and American economic power to guarantee it. It wasn't theoretical. It was ready to go live immediately. Nations could choose: join the new dollar system now, or be left out of the post-war reconstruction. Most chose the dollar. Britain's pound was finished as the global reserve within 18 months. Modern parallel, January 2026. The BRICS didn't just announce the unit. They launched it fully operational. Here's how it works. 40% backed by physical gold held in vaults across member nations. Auditable, verifiable, real metal. 60% backed by a weighted basket of BRICS currencies: yuan, rupee, ruble, real, rand. This dual backing makes it both stable, through gold, and growth-oriented, through rising economies. And it's not just on paper. Russia and China are already conducting 90% of their bilateral trade. Hundreds of billions of dollars in oil, gas, electronics, and commodities, without using US dollars. They're settling in units and local currencies. The unit isn't a future promise. It's already moving billions in real trade right now. Stage 3 is live. Stage 4. Create the tipping point. The final stage is where the new system reaches critical mass. You don't need everyone to switch. Just enough key players that staying in the old system becomes the risky choice. Historical example, 1947 to 1956. After Bretton Woods, the dollar system grew rapidly. Major economies joined. Trade shifted to dollars. By the time Britain tried to defend the pound during the 1956 Suez Crisis, it was too late. America threatened to crash the pound if Britain didn't withdraw from Suez. Britain had no choice. Their currency was vulnerable, their reserves were thin, and the world had already moved to dollars. The pound's dominance ended not with a bang, but with quiet, inevitable irrelevance. Modern parallel, we're entering stage 4 right now. The unit isn't trying to replace the dollar everywhere, overnight. That's not how this works. Instead, BRICS is targeting third-party nations, countries that aren't in the alliance yet but are watching carefully. Nations like Indonesia, 275 million people, massive dollar-denominated debt. Turkey, caught between NATO and BRICS pressure. Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, desperate for currency stability. Pakistan, Bangladesh, Vietnam, emerging markets with dollar vulnerability. These countries face constant pressure from dollar volatility, dollar-based sanctions, and expensive dollar debt. The unit offers them something the dollar system doesn't: options. Every time one of these countries joins the unit system, even for just a portion of their trade, it reduces global dollar demand by another increment. And once enough countries make that choice, staying in a dollar-only system starts to feel like the risky move. That's the tipping point. We're not there yet, but stage 4 has begun. The current situation. So where exactly are we in this playbook right now? Let me give you the hard data. The BRICS alliance, as of January 2026, represents 46% of the global population, 3.6 billion people, $28 trillion in combined GDP. The world's largest oil producers: Russia, Saudi Arabia, UAE. The world's largest manufacturers: China, India. The world's largest gold buyers: China, Russia, India. This isn't a fringe coalition. This is half the planet. Russia-China trade, 90% settled without dollars. That's not a projection. That's current reality, verified by customs data. Hundreds of billions in annual trade flowing through alternative currencies, and now the unit system. If two of the world's largest economies can trade at that scale without dollars, the model is proven. Here's where it gets interesting for anyone holding gold or thinking about it. The unit is 40% backed by physical gold. If the system scales, if more countries join and more trade flows through the unit, the demand for gold backing could go exponential. Major financial institutions like JP Morgan are forecasting gold prices hitting $5,000 per ounce by late 2026. Some analysts are projecting $8,000 or higher if BRICS expansion accelerates. Why? Basic supply and demand mathematics. You have massive continuous institutional demand from BRICS central banks needing to back an expanding currency system meeting relatively fixed global supply of physical gold. The unit isn't just a currency innovation. It's a potential structural game changer for gold prices. Every transaction settled in units requires gold backing. More units means more gold demand. And we're talking about a system that could eventually handle trillions in trade annually. The timeline. Based on the historical playbook, Stage 3, launch, January 2026. Complete. Stage 4, Tipping Point, 2026 to 2028. We are here. Outcome. By 2028 to 2030, the dollar either shares reserve currency status in a multipolar system, or it faces severe erosion of its exorbitant privilege. This isn't a next month collapse. This is an 18 to 36-month strategic shift. What this means for America. The United States has enjoyed what economists call exorbitant privilege for 80 years. Because the world uses dollars for trade and reserves, America gets to borrow money more easily and more cheaply than any other nation. America can run enormous trade deficits year after year, importing far more than it exports because other countries need to accumulate dollars to function in global trade. And most critically, the U.S. can use access to the dollar system as an incredibly powerful geopolitical weapon through sanctions, asset freezes, and financial exclusion. The BRICS unit is a direct, calculated challenge to that entire arrangement. This isn't about the dollar collapsing next week or hyperinflation hitting next month. That's not how this plays out. Instead, the unit puts America's free ride on a timer. It creates erosion, not explosion. For the first time in modern history, there's a credible large-scale alternative system being built by major economies that offers countries a viable way to opt out of dollar dependency. The unit creates choice where previously there was monopoly. And every time a country chooses to settle even a portion of their trade in units instead of dollars, it incrementally reduces the global demand for dollars that underpins American financial power. If enough countries make that choice, even for just some of their transactions, it slowly but inexorably chips away at the exorbitant privilege. The U.S. isn't facing a sudden catastrophic crash. What America faces is the very real beginning of a gradual, persistent erosion of its most powerful economic advantage. And once that erosion starts and gains momentum, it's nearly impossible to reverse because the benefits of the alternative become self-reinforcing. The counterargument. Now, here's where we need to be honest about the cracks in this playbook. Because the BRICS alliance isn't a unified empire. It's a coalition of rivals held together by one shared interest: escaping Western financial control. China and India have active border disputes. They've had deadly military clashes as recently as 2020. Their competition for regional dominance in Asia is intense. Russia and China present a united front against the West, but historically they've been rivals for influence in Central Asia. Their partnership is strategic, not natural. Brazil's democratic government has fundamentally different political values than Russia's authoritarian system. Economic asymmetry. China's economy is 10 times larger than South Africa's. Who really controls the unit's monetary policy? Managing a shared currency system requires giving up significant amounts of individual monetary sovereignty and policy control. That's an enormous ask for any proud, powerful nation. What happens during the inevitable economic crisis? If one member country faces a severe recession or currency crisis, do the others bail them out? Who decides monetary policy? Who controls the gold reserves? What if political relationships deteriorate between members? These are the kinds of questions that tore apart previous monetary unions. The European common currency, the euro, nearly collapsed during the Greek debt crisis precisely because of these coordination problems. And those were countries with much more shared history, values, and political integration than BRICS has. So the greatest threat to the unit might not come from the US or Western sanctions or financial warfare from outside. The threat might be internal fracture, disagreement, and the simple difficulty of maintaining unity among diverse nations with competing interests over the long term. This is the vulnerability that Western analysts are counting on. The bet that BRICS will eventually fracture under the weight of its own contradictions. But here's the counterargument that's important to consider. Shared opposition can be a powerful unifying force. The BRICS nations may have differences, but they share one overwhelming common interest: reducing dependency on a Western-dominated financial system that can be weaponized against them. That shared motivation, driven by genuine security concerns after watching Russia get financially isolated, may be strong enough to overcome internal differences, at least for the foreseeable future. The bottom line. So, let's synthesize everything and arrive at the bottom line. What's the final assessment of the BRICS unit going live in January 2026? This is not the story of the US dollar dying next month. That's a sensational headline designed for clicks, but it's not grounded in reality. The launch of the unit is better understood as the starting gun for a long, slow-motion transformation of the global financial architecture. The unit's real victory isn't immediately replacing the dollar. Its success is simply existing and functioning as a credible working alternative. For 80 years since Bretton Woods, there was effectively no choice in reserve currencies and international settlement. The dollar was it. Now there is a choice, and that changes everything. What we are witnessing in real time is the end of a total monopoly and the beginning of genuine competition in global reserve currencies. What this means in practical terms: the dollar's dominance will face steady incremental pressure rather than a single catastrophic collapse. It means countries around the world suddenly have negotiating leverage they never possessed before. When the US threatens sanctions, a country can now credibly respond. We'll just shift more of our trade to the unit system. That's a game changer in geopolitical negotiations. The world isn't splitting cleanly into two separate financial blocks overnight. Instead, we're evolving into a much more complex, multi-layered financial ecosystem where countries will use different systems for different purposes, different trading partners, different transactions. Some trade in dollars, some in units, some in euros, some in yuan. The BRICS unit has firmly planted its flag in this new multipolar landscape. And once planted, it's very difficult to remove. The game has fundamentally changed. The rules that governed global finance for your entire life are being rewritten in real time. And whether you're an investor, a business owner, or just someone trying to protect your savings, understanding this shift isn't optional anymore. It's essential, because the world that emerges from this transformation will look very different from the one we've known. The era of unchallenged dollar supremacy is over. What comes next is anyone's guess, but ignoring it is no longer an option.